She has always, even, through high school and everything, really welcomed adult peer conversation. I'm sure that will come as no surprise to those of you who know her through movement work. Always opened her doors to everyone. So many friends in the house all the time. But ultimately, Ellen was my friend's mom. And and as over the years, as I was a teacher, and then I became an organizer. And so now I've been in the organizing world for some number of years. And of course, I've heard of 9 to 5. I had no idea. I'm reading through the book, and Ellen's like doing the organizing classes, and she's, just totally, breaking all of the rules as one does when you're an organizer, fighting to make change. And I just, I'm so honored. And now it really goes to show, friends' moms, don't take them for granted. And I now turn it over to you, Ellen, to share with us an excerpt, some words.
Great. So thank you to Lost City Books and Shady Rose in particular. Thanks so much. And Kristin Mink has been inspiring me for about 20 years now. And I also want to say that some people here were involved in 9 to 5 right from the start. Judy Kohler and Nussbaum, and Mary Jean Collins was a classmate of mine in the Midwest Academy. So we've got some resources here. Also, some of these people are characters in the book. So thank you all for being here. And I want to start with a little excerpt, and then Kristin and I are going to have a conversation, and then there'll be questions and answers, and I'll sign books. So this is from the first pages of the book. Get your 9 to 5 newsletter. Get your 9 to 5. The highest windows of the Boston skyline were just beginning to brighten as I stood shivering outside a subway stop on an early December morning in 1972. I was 22 years old, one of a group of 10 young women who had spread out across the city that morning to distribute the first issue of our new newsletter called 9 to 5 after the hours of the workday. Up the subway stairs came a stampede of boots and coats and faces, women headed for executive suites and typing pools, small firms and giant corporations, stuffy back offices and gleaming glass towers. For the next 8 hours, they would file, collate, mimeograph, staple, stuff, type, address, punch, seal, alphabetize, transcribe, photocopy, and find a few minutes, I hope, to look at the newsletter I was pressing into their hands with my frozen fingers. At that point, the first pink pussy hat had not yet been knitted. In women's March. And the Me Too movement against sexual misconduct in the workplace was years in the future, but something was afoot. As office work moved rapidly to the center of the economy, the clerical workforce was growing by leaps and bounds, and discontent among its mostly female members was on the rise. They wanted to be treated fairly and compensated equally on the job. A few years later, in a blockbuster movie inspired by our movement, Jane Fonda and her co-stars would bring that discontent to life on the big screen. It began to dawn on us that we had our finger on the pulse of a giant and growing sector of the American workforce. We didn't know what we wanted to do, but we had dreams. Could we form a union, a citywide organization, maybe something even bigger? At the turn of the 20th century, women working in the garment factories had organized by the hundreds of thousands. Now it was no longer mill workers, but office workers who held the low-paid, low-status jobs at the center of our changing economy. Maybe now it was our turn to add a link to the chain of social change that stretched back through the generations, and maybe I could be part of forging that link. Wayne Wyndham is the author of Knocking on Labor's Door, a wonderful book that covers some of the same history that's just come in. So that's how we sort of.
What prompted you to, decide that you were going to put this story into book form?
I think it was because I wanted to write a book of the kind of book that I was hungry for when I was starting out as an organizer. there weren't very many books like this that really told what it felt like to be an organizer, to start out from scratch and scratch your way to something bigger, and what those long days in the office felt like, and what it felt like to be part of a really tight team working together, and to build from the bottom up something bigger and bigger and bigger that actually made change. I wanted to tell both the very beginning when I went to the Midwest Academy and started going to my first recruitment lunches and what was I going to wear and all that. And then on into the nationwide movement and the 9/5 film and the Dolly Parton song. You know, when we got started, sexual harassment was perfectly legal. Pregnancy discrimination was legal. The newspapers had help wanted male and help wanted female ads. We were doing the same work as men for different pay, lower pay. Our jobs were dead ends. Women were training men to be their own supervisors. And women complained, as one woman put it, we were referred to as girls until the day we retire without pension. And we were asked to do favors for bosses, all kinds of favors, the worst. So I wanted to tell that story.
You know, as we're looking around now, you know, and we are seeing there are many things now that need changing, right? And we see many things that feel like they're coming to a head. And similarly, you know, the women's movement at the time, you know, these problems had existed and had, you know, continued to snowball. What do you think caused the 9-to-5 movement to begin wonderfully?
Well, back then, women office workers were 1/3 of the female workforce, but we were basically invisible. When people thought worker, they thought of a man with a hard hat wielding a wrench. And so there we were, 20 million strong, and nobody, I mean, it was as if we didn't exist. Women ourselves didn't know how great our power was and how large our forces were. Unions, we were not on their radar screen. Bosses would, you know, breeze by in the morning. I remember one of our members passed her boss on the street one day and he didn't recognize her. So Lane Wyndham has talked about how what happened in the early 70s was the coming together of two rivers, the economic and the cultural. So women were pouring into the workforce to staff the growth of these administrative parts of the economy as industry was fading somewhat. The financial industry was growing. And families needed more income than they were able to get with just one job. And so women were coming out of the nurseries and the kitchens into the office towers. And the other factor was cultural. Because of the civil rights movement and women's movement, people expected more than they had before. They dreamed bigger. They wanted not just a job, but a good job. And that's why 1973 was the hour that we began.
So you got together, you said, the time is right, everybody's angry, there's a lot of us, let's do something. What were you thinking you could actually accomplish? What were you hoping you could actually accomplish?
Well, you know those garment workers from the turn of the 20th century, their slogan was bread and roses. And we thought, we are their heirs. It's our turn. Our slogan became raises and roses, or sometimes raises, not roses. We wanted to build a multiracial, multi-class, multi-age organization, and we did that, and I'm very proud of that. We wanted to win fair treatment for all women office workers, to unionize women by the millions, to also to transform the whole labor movement. So we got big.
I mean, I'm very, very glad that you all did. You mentioned the desire to build a multiracial movement. And I wanted to talk about that because a lot of the criticism when we look back at feminism and at the women's movement decades ago is that it was by and for white women. And so reading the book, it really stood out to me that that was something that you all talked about, that you were consciously thinking like this, it's important that this be a multiracial movement. At the same time, you're facing the reality of racist hiring practices and who those office workers really are, who you're trying to mobilize and hoping to have in leadership. So if you could just talk a little bit about the challenges of building the multiracial movement and organization that you wanted to build. What were some of the things that you tried? What were some of your successes, difficulties?
Yeah, so Boston was a largely white city, not 100%, but largely. And in the office industries, very few women of color were hired as clerical workers. So we kind of did our best in Boston, but we soon realized that this was not going to be the organization we wanted it to be unless we expanded nationwide. And we targeted cities where there was a very diverse clerical workforce, and that meant Cleveland and Baltimore, Atlanta, Milwaukee. Because and then once we did that, we made sure that our membership, our leadership, and our staff reflected the demographics of the clerical workforce. When we started union organizing, we recognized that you can't win a union drive unless you reach out into every part of the workforce. And where there were diverse workforces, that meant making sure that we had a diverse organizing committee. And this kind of thing, it doesn't just happen,
right?
It took a lot of hard work and really keeping your eye on the ball. And I feel that we did a good job, and we were very fortunate that in finding people who wanted to join forces, keep the target in front of our eyes, link arms, and move forward together.
Yeah, and I think that's so important because it doesn't just happen because we recognize the reality that we're functioning within a system of white supremacy, within a system of patriarchy, that the default is always going to leave other folks behind. So unless you're really putting in the conscious effort to make sure that you are diversifying not just your membership, but your leadership, your staff, like all of the parts, it doesn't just happen. So very forward thinking of you all to address that at the time. I mean, that's still an issue that we see now. In fact, even the first with the Women's March, that was a major criticism, and they did have, of course, women of color who were on the board and everything, but turnout ended up being so heavily white, and that's a lot of times an issue with marches or rallies that are primarily promoted through progressive social media spaces, as you think of them. And if that's a primary driver of turnout, then often you end up with this very heavily white turnout result. And so we have to be very consciously reaching into all of the different communities and making sure that all those folks in all those different communities have a leadership seat at the table. To your point. So what was it like for you, Ellen, Meg's mom, but also just Ellen, organizer, badass? What was it like for you to become an activist and also an organizer?
Well, I have to say that the early days were pretty scary. I am somebody who, for example, as a teenager, I was afraid to call the movie theater to ask what kind of movie. To write out a little script for myself. Me, what time is the movie? And space for the lesson. Me, thank you. So, but strangely enough, I think those fears that I had actually helped me as an organizer, because it made it so that I understood why somebody else was scared to go around in a circle and what's your name, and people's hearts would start pounding, and I knew that from inside. We were very sensitive to how hard it was. For like at first we would we tried out different things. We'd say to people, could you put a stack of newspapers in the ladies' room in your building? And a lot of people wouldn't, because what if they got caught? And we thought this was simple. You don't have to talk to anybody. It's really easy, but it wasn't. Pass out the newsletter in front of the subway stop. Well, what if my boss gets off the subway? Or what if somebody is mean to me? People that were not up for it. So we, for example, when we had people giving speeches, we told them, if you're afraid you're going to throw up, just bring a wastebasket. we practiced over and over again, and we had a series of steps that, first you come to the meeting, then you bring a friend to the meeting, then you maybe give a little tiny report at the meeting, and so on. And people, zoomed through these steps, and pretty soon they were up there and they're talking to the press, they were on TV, they were, challenging some government agency kuba. So I think for all the fears at first, it was also so exhilarating and full of joy. And when I was doing the research for the book, I found this little clipping that I had put up on the bulletin board in my office that I totally forgotten about. And it said, "Through our great good fortune, in our youth, our hearts were touched with fire." And that's how it was.
Wow, yeah, that's great. I love when you talk about, the diversity of roles that people could take on as they came into the organizing world ever so gradually. What were some of the challenges that your organization confronted?
I think number one was that there was no history of collective action in this constituency. There were not leaders out there in the community as there are in community organizing. And people tended to feel very individually about their problems. Like, if they hadn't gotten that promotion, well, maybe I should have dressed for success. Maybe I should have gotten that degree. Maybe I should have taken another class. So we had to just really batter down that feeling that it was, my own fault, and get across the idea that it was a systemic problem and it could be solved only by collective action. The other thing was that the office industries are very authoritarian. You could not get up from your seat in the typing pool without your supervisor seeing it. And we would, we'd go to these giant skyscrapers, which were surrounded by private plazas. Often security guards were stationed outside of them, so you could only stand out along the curb. We would hand out, people would come streaming in, you'd be scurrying around trying to get the leaflet to everybody. And when they got inside the door, often supervisors would be standing there and just snatch the leaflets right out of their hand. So, people were justifiably scared. They didn't have experience of getting together and confronting the boss. But, we listened really carefully to what people would be willing to do. I remember one time I was, one of my bailiwicks was the publishing industry in Boston. And these women were quite a challenge for me. The Boston Globe Book Festival was about to be held, and this was a place where thousands of people would be coming. Everybody in the publishing industry would be there. It was a perfect place for us to, meet everybody. And I said, "Great, let's put up a picket line around the whole festival." And there was like this moment of silence. Everybody looked at me, and then someone said, "We should rent a table inside." And so we did rent a table. Everybody wanted to staff the table. We handed out a survey, and from there we went on and eventually won, millions of dollars in back pay from the publishing industry. But that took me being able to step back and say, okay, they know what they're doing. I'm going to just go with this. One of our things we did early on was we had women write a Bill of Rights. This was the Cradle of Liberty, Boston. And people wrote up this list of 10 rights on the job posting, career ladders, equal pay, and so on. They got to 10, they couldn't stop. They wrote 13 rights. We started bad boss contests where we invited people to send in examples of the worst thing they had been asked to do, and entries poured in. The winner one time was a boss who had asked his secretary to sew up a hole in his pants while he was wearing them. We also took a group to meet the boss who had fired his secretary for bringing him a corned beef on white instead of rye. And he went back down. I mean, some infractions are just unforgivable. So, we had a three-pronged strategy. One was public exposure, just embarrassing the companies. We were in the media all the time. One was getting government agencies to help us out. And that didn't just mean we'd go to the Commission Against Discrimination and file a charge and leave. It meant that we were on their backs and sort of backing up what they were doing with being outside the banks and telling the employees that these agents were coming in and they should talk to them and so on. And then there was the tactic of whistleblowers, making it possible for women to anonymously clue us into what was going on inside the companies. So one day we received a copy of a memo that had been sent by the boss of New England Life Insurance to all the management, saying that they were gonna, as a result of us, they were gonna make some big changes in the company. So this was like passed along. Another thing we did was there was a semi-secret organization called the Boston Survey Group that all the big companies belong to. And we filed a charge against them, accusing them of wage setting. But the interesting thing was that although they were semi-secret, the people who were typing the letters, the agendas, setting up the meetings and so on, would tell us what was happening. So we were always there when they were having a meeting. We were outside.
I want to pause you on one of those. We talked about how you were in the media a lot, and you had all of these different creative actions. And I know that now in the organizing world, that some of my favorite organizing calls are where we're like, we have this situation happening. What are we going to do? Like, what's the action going to be? How are we going to get press around it? And then, maybe we try this, and then if that doesn't work, then we escalate to this. Or sometimes it's like, so-and-so is going to be in town. We could really disrupt in this particular way, or, whatever. But, you mentioned the Bad Boss Awards, which I thought was just so brilliant. But I wonder if you could share just a little bit about what some of those conversations might have been like, or any other actions that you did, or maybe actions that you batted around but didn't do, or, as you're thinking about what is going to get press, what some of the other, particular Bad Boss Awards might have been. But I think those are just so fun to hear about.
Yeah. One day, one of our organizers was coming back from a recruitment lunch, and she saw this woman dressed as a bumblebee who was handing out flyers. It turned out that this woman had been hired to be a clerk in the back office of a small, clothing company that had the name B in it. And what wasn't mentioned in the job description was that she was going to have to dress up as a bumblebee and pass out flyers all, during the lunch hour. So we showed up with a, pot of honey and don't get stung by a bad boss. Somebody wrote a song. And the press covered it on page 1 of the Globe.
Wow.
Part of what was happening was that this was so new, and people had never heard of this kind of thing before. Office workers, people in platform shoes who were out there with protest signs. No one had ever seen it before. Another thing was that the reporters, some of the women reporters themselves, were experiencing some of this kind of discrimination themselves, and so they were delighted to get it out there. One time we built a giant coffee cup in the downtown City Hall Plaza, and no explanation necessary. Just people got it right away. So showing up at the bankers convention, I mean, it's partly that it had never been done before.
Yeah.
So,
can we go here?
yeah.
Is that okay? 9 to 5 itself was not a union, but it did, spawn a union. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so employers understood right from the start what we were up to. But women were not ready for a union by and large at that point, mostly. So we just sort of plowed ahead, keeping this in the back of our minds. And after just 2 years, we started interviewing union officials in the Boston area to see if we could get something going. And the reception we got was rather cool. And I think understandably, because it was just it was just outside the, people just had never thought of
Steel workers.
just weren't set up to deal with this group of feisty young women who thought, oh, we can organize, sure, but we ended up getting a good reception from the Service Employees International Union, SEIU, and they gave us a charter for local, what we call local 925. And our goal was to sow confusion. Is it 9-5? Is it 925?
I love that. Local 925, like 9 to France.
And in 1981, we went national with this with District 925. And we soon had drives going on all over the country. So we won great contracts. We brought thousands of women into the labor movement.
That's fantastic. And then the employers responded by, how would you?
Well, let me just read you a little something from the very beginning of the 9-to-5. When right after we had our first meeting, we decided we should take on the Chamber of Commerce, whose job was to present, the face of the employer to the public. So we wanted to go to the Chamber of Commerce and get them to sort of host some kind of hearing of our complaints and our problems. So we met with this guy. And a couple of weeks later, we received a letter from him. It said, we here at the Greater Boston Chamber of Commerce have given a great deal of thought as to how we might cooperate with your group. We have come to the firm conclusion that the program you have in mind relative to employment of women office workers cannot and does not fit into the activities of the Chamber. Salaries and conditions of work are the responsibilities of individual firms. The charter of the Chamber does not permit it to inject itself into matters of an intimate nature, such as personnel policies and wages. I would respectfully suggest that individual members of 9-to-5 who feel they have legitimate complaints arrange to discuss such matters with the particular employers concerned. And they never met with us again. Now, in 1981, when we started our District 9-to-5, this was the beginning of the heyday of union busting. And just about every place we went, the companies hired these union busting lawyers or consultants whose job was to use the National Labor Relations Act to delay, discourage, decertify. And it was pretty easy because the law over the years had been watered down to the point where management could do a lot with impunity. And so people got fired for organizing. Companies threatened to shut down. These were things were supposedly illegal, but there was no enforcement, and it was effectively the wave of organizing that started in the 70s was pretty crushed in the 80s.
Yeah, I mean, we're seeing a lot of, like unions are in the news a lot, have been a lot recently. I'll mention I'm a union member myself, big supporter of labor unions. And there was a Gallup poll recently that showed like 71% or so are supportive of unions. Yet a very small percentage, 10% or so, of the workforce are in unions currently. So how do we explain that?
Yeah. Well, it probably requires a much longer answer, but it's part of what I just said, that the law is so weak that through many things that have happened in the economy, the sort of hollowing out of the industrial sector, the growth of the non-union service sector, globalization, the employers, the corporate class has been up to some really, really powerful tricks. And what's so exciting today is that there is this surge of labor organizing among retail workers, restaurant workers, warehouse workers, grad students. There's really a resurgence, and that's really exciting to see.
I was just at American University, where the AU staff who are members of SEIU Local 500 went on strike there, and they've tried to negotiate for couple of years and had just been told, don't bother, like this is the contract, take it or leave it, and you don't have any power, and eventually went on strike. And we're striking as students arrive, which was just so powerful. And I mean, it was just brilliant. And what was really incredible in that moment was seeing this arriving students really, I mean, if they don't learn anything else this school year, but that, like, I'd be a happy parent, you know. And then during the, you know, introductory ceremonies or whatever, the president of the university got up to give her spiel, and a mass of students stood up and walked out to go stand with, I'm getting chills just talking about it, to go stand with the staff outside, and the union members after we were talking, and they were like, this is, you know, the best moment of my professional career. Seeing, you know, the solidarity in that moment. And those kids, some of them are going to go on to become employers, some of them are going to go on to become employees, and whoever they may be, this is a valuable lesson for them. And so I'm hoping as we see this resurgence, you know, as this generation coming up and seeing it, that we really see that that compels a different kind of leadership and continues to compel more workers to demand the rights that are due to them. And I'll also mention that, you know, I've been observing here in Montgomery County at least, but also I think some other places, that the attitude towards folks who are in, you know, say the retail space or whatever, unionizing seems to be a little different than the attitude around union members who are, you know, public unions. You know, our teachers and our, you know, a variety of workers there, who of course are also workers who are deserving of all of these same things. And so I hope that we can work on, you know, changing that sentiment also. People should be able to empathize with everybody who is making our county and our city and our country run just as much as the person who is, you know, serving coffee or, you know, delivering their Amazon packages.
Yeah. So let me just end with what I hope people will take away from the story of 9 to 5, with a little excerpt from the paragraph. Our hopes and dreams were huge. We didn't win it all. In this line of work, you're always reaching for the horizon and beyond. You're never satisfied. You never achieve everything you tried for. Your victories along the way only whet your appetite for more. So there's much more to do. Isn't that the way it always goes? There's an old labor song that says, freedom is a hard-won thing. You've got to work for it, fight for it, day and night for it, and every generation's got to win it again. So my message with my book to all those striving for fair treatment and a better world is learn from the past, learn from what we went through, but forge your own path and go for it. So we've got to see questions either to Kristin or myself. Comments?
Go ahead. I wanted to thank you so much for the opportunity to hear you, and thank you for writing the book. I've been fighting sexual harassment in the healthcare space, and I was a witness in an investigation that led to a sanction of a doctor. And for me, it's like, I love to when you said joy, because Loretta Ross talks about that, like calling people in. There's a time to call people in and there's a time to call people out, but there's like, we have to find joy in these movements and what we're doing. But I was sitting here too and thinking, like, it's not good enough for me that I just went through this and I took a huge financial hit on this. And, you know, the Attorney General doesn't give you a check for your time and the 2 years that it took. So I'm wondering, like any feedback you would give, and I'm going to get the book, and because I'm looking on how to organize bigger. People have come to me when I've shared, like in safe spaces, that similar things or worse have happened to them. But they're like, how did you do it? Because there's, when you're dealing with doctor, you're dealing with your private information and everything. So that's like, I feel like one of the obstacles, but thank you for just inspiring.
Thank you for that. It's funny, I think when we got started, it was sort of like that, people would they were afraid to say what their salary was. I remember one of our organizers called a meeting in the cafeteria where she worked, and she said, okay, everybody has to either say their salary or their weight. They were both like the secret, and of course employers benefit from that, and people thought they'd gotten a special deal, and when they found out they hadn't, they were really mad. But I think the beginnings of something like this, it always seems like, well, it's just me, it's a private thing, I'm ashamed to talk about it, and so much is gained from just sharing your story and just getting people together to talk. So congratulations to you, and yeah, I hope the book will help to inspire you.
Thank you.
I'll add on also, if I can, that so the harassment of patients, right?
Sexual harassment
Harassment of
and
patients.
misconduct, yes,
Wow.
by mental health professionals. And
Oh my
actually,
gosh.
my daughter was a student at where you taught.
No way.
So it happened
Wow.
while you were still teaching.
Oh
and
my gosh.
yeah, and yeah.
Wow. Oh my, wow.
Small world.
Small
Yeah.
world. Well, I was going to say, that particular situation reminds me of, it's a situation where the same type of bad thing is happening to different people in different places. And so it reminds me of, the kind of organizing that's done around, for example, school shootings, where you see, students, come together in March for Our Lives who have been victims of, different shooting situations. You also see parents who have, lost kids come together. And so it's this process of, when somebody shares their story, then often, somebody will reach out and say, oh, the same thing happened to me. Now there's two of you, and gradually you start to grow that network. But even when it's only, a very small number of you, the story is so powerful if you're willing to be public with it, and or if you're willing to take it to legislators. And sometimes it's a combination. So, two of you went in to sit down with, a state legislator or a congressional legislator and said, like, this is a problem. There's no regulations here. We're missing this type of protections. What can be done about this? And start to, now you have something that you're aiming for. Now you have something else to talk to the press about. More people will start to come and say, this is something that I care about too. Now you kind of form this loose coalition, maybe you name the coalition, the group, and so on. Maybe one day you incorporate it as a nonprofit or not. But it's these little bits and pieces of gradually, working the press angle to get the story out, talking with your legislators and so on.
County council members.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Yes, and thank you for giving me your cell phone number because I reached out to you.
Good,
So thank you.
good.
Thank you so much. I learned a lot already from you both tonight. So some happy news. I just recently unionized my workplace. It's a nonprofit. It's a good deal these days. So my question to both of you, so what, and more so, and also for Ellen in particular, so what do you see, the movement today, the labor movement, what does it have today that you wish you had back then? And I would love to learn from you, like, what did you wish you had right now that that they had back then? So I just wanted to get perspectives from you both.
Yeah. Well, I can answer your question. Let's think. I think what we're seeing in the surge of labor organizing today is such a spirit of, boy, we know that we're not getting what we should be getting, and we feel really strongly and passionately about it. And back then it was, I think, a little more tentative, and we had to really sort of kindle and blow on the fire to get people to recognize yeah, there is discrimination. Women are being treated worse. And we do need to join together to do something about it. And I think what I sense in the Amazon workers and the Starbucks workers is just a confidence. And that's just so wonderful to see. And the leadership from people of color and women is just really out there. And it's just great to see.
I will say that the newness
That's what I was gonna say.
it seems like maybe fun is not the right word, but I'll just say it kind of seems like a fun space to play in where that you can really surprise people.
Exactly what I was gonna say.
Yeah, and that you can all this creativity that was it was just all before you, and you were able to just really sit around that and come up with these really creative ideas and then get media attention. And so much honestly has been done now that so many conversations are like, press isn't going to cover that. I mean, it's like ridiculous. I have priced out blimps, I mean, it really is. I to try to get Senator Manchin's attention, I bought kayaks. I brought West Virginians up. We kayaked up to his yacht, and I mean, we had to do that. We had to kayak out. They had to stay a week because we had to kayak out to his yacht and yell at him and make a ruckus and have his neighbors for 4 days in a row before we got coverage. Yeah. And we only got coverage because he actually came out and talked to us. Yeah. And I don't know that we even would have gotten press if he hadn't done that. I hope he's not watching because I always want him to come out.
But you did that, and we went through plenty of times like that where we tried and nothing happened, and so that's the way it is. But good for you.
Yeah, I mean, I know like every week is more difficult than the week, than the week before, and but honestly, like the gifts, the bad boss, I'm like, oh, that we could recycle that. I feel let's bring it back. It's it's we could refresh it in some kind of way or whatever, but it's it's so clever and creative, and so I think that.
Real quick, two-part question. Could you say something briefly about financial sustainability and capacity, organizational capacity? These are the approaches that you're familiar with, like if you incorporate as a not-for-profit, et cetera. And then part two, what about the relevance, or could you say something about the relevance of international labor standards? The U.S. government being a signatory, with the International Labor Organization and then the UN Convention on Civil and Political Rights, stuff like that. Like, can you, when you're making your case to employers, to the U.S. government, point to what we've already, what we are as a government telling the rest of the world that we support?
Fiscal sustainability, that's a big one. And I think it's something that a lot of times organizations don't think about enough. We started out on a shoestring, and pretty soon, a few weeks went by, and our coffers were getting really, really low, and it was a terrible nightmare. We did grassroots fundraising. We had a tag day where we had people stand on street corners shaking a can, and if you gave $1, you got a little button, a red button with a white rose on it. That brought in thousands of dollars. We did door-to-door canvassing. We had dues that were, $50 a year. That didn't bring us a whole lot. And we did a lot of foundation fundraising. And there were foundations, some of which actually believed in what we were doing, and many of them did not, but they were willing to, fund a research report or something like that. So we had to get very creative about what we were going to be studying, and then we would skim off money to do organizing. As far as labor standards, I think that what seems most relevant to me is that being able to say, well, here's the way they do it in Sweden, or, this works for every other country but the United States, can be a powerful thing. It can, especially for talking to employees rather than employers who already know that, and they know why they're not adhering to those standards, because it means more money in their pockets, even when it's not exactly true, it would work better if the United States functioned as a more with a social contract on the job. But so, and as far as actually the United States has signed on to this, that, or the other, that is not so relevant to what we did. Does anybody else have anything to say about that? International standards.
No one cares.
Yes, do you think that having an increased awareness of labor issues and respect for women, people of color in the workplace makes it easier or harder? Because people now have more awareness due to media, social media, and all that. Do you think that that creates, more of a challenge? Or is it easier to get in there with people?
If I understand what you're saying, I think that people's awareness that there is discrimination, it is harder for women and people of color in the workplace, can only be a good thing. And I can use the example of the 9 to 5 film of 1980, Jane Fonda's movie, that really changed the debate, the public debate about working women. And just having these, thousands and thousands of people go and see these issues presented as a joke, a spoof on the screen, made people think, yeah, those bosses are really, it's ridiculous. What's going on here? And I think that kind of conversation, whether it's through comedy or actual serious, news coverage,
Facts and transparency is almost always on the side of the right, but not the political right, those who are in the right with the right values at heart.
So, one more question and then we can move
What's the
on.
relationship between the book and the movie? How did it develop, or what was the dynamic? I haven't read the book. So.
Okay, so I can tell you about the movement of the movie,
That's
which
fine.
is that Jane Fonda knew Karen Nussbaum from the anti-Vietnam War movement and came to her and said she wanted to make a film about the concerns of women office workers, and we were thrilled. They brought a team of filmmakers to meet with our members, and they popped this question that we had never thought to ask in all our recruitment lunches, which was, have you ever fantasized about doing in your box? There was this stunned silence, and then the room just exploded, and everybody had, it turned out. There was a woman who had dreamed about grinding her boss up in a coffee machine. Somebody who fantasized about swiveling her boss in a swivel chair and swooping him right out the window. All this went into the movie. And so the movement inspired the movie, and the movie really propelled the movement. And I talk about that in the book, but the book was really inspired by the whole thing, 50 years ago it started. And it was actually, it's a very wonderful process for me to relive that time and to just kind of think it over. I think there's like a great old age project to think back and sort of put it all in its place. And I just came to feel that it was such an incredible privilege for me to be involved in this. So I think that's it. You get a book signed, you start here, I sign the book, and then you take it downstairs. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And again, if your name is Chelsea Bland, I have your book here. Oh, you've got one. Okay, you're good.
Oh.
Let's put this one back.
Wow. Oh, that's wow, that's basically good. You know, last year you have to leave my current job. And, but, you know, I still have. Going to jobs. Election. But it's great, you know, it's good to feel like, you know, it's so hard to get something.
I know you, but I can't
Yeah,
recognize
thought
your
first, go
name.
back.
You are, oh,
I
I bring you three. My, yes, yeah. My wife, Nancy Van and you're doing okay?
Yeah. Yes.
All right. She's great. And, you know, our work continues. Yeah. Well, I'm still with the union. You know, I consult with several locals, but I'm also in the district. We're both trying to make the gains we can. On the bike, there are some things we are achieving, not as much as we need, but we also need to protect our union for what may come. He's already laid out. Yeah. I mean, years long potential execution, so gotta get our members organized. We're in a lot of big states, you know, from New Hampshire to just
it's not bad. You know, it's a, back and forth anyway. When
Oh, he's more community volunteer and a lot of play, but it's also you know, just supporting community stuff. I you know, I am active with the IAF and help them with great wine. IAF. That's it. Yeah. They're back to the countries, except that he's teaching is the way they're at the top of the plan. Oh, well, actually, Montgomery's probably the strongest, but they have a very strong group. And Wendell, like that. Pretty interesting. And I you know, through my church, and you know, they're willing to accept Jesus and
about pools, showing them pools, my neighbors.
right.
Yeah. Files.
Right. So they periodically have done some good work in PG. It's I don't have to tell you, you know what the terrain is like. I know you're good with it, but that is an intense and training struggle, you know, all too well. I preaching about and I really
you know, very appreciative of the fact that you dived into it. You know, I mean, what you did was important and good. Yeah,
Figure out how.
yeah.
The standalone of this.
We will do that. Keep up the good work.
Kristen, I do want to. Just again, congratulations. Maybe get together. So let me. I know all your colleagues, so I'm a councilman now. So, but if you have time for lunch, just to chat, I'd love to have coffee and check. Okay. Alan, Jody will be.
Yes. She actually went to the pipeline. I was invited to. No.
It's actually a health check. There's a lot Wow. That makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Please, so.
That makes a lot. Certainly, how we, there will share policy.
Our son, was married, after a year's delay.
But how are you
doing?
doing? You know, I don't know. Primary. So that's, I really didn't get to see my kids. But it's morning.
Yeah.
So.
Things are progressing. Well, that's, we're doing it on the start. When she stopped.
And I also really want to use this.
Alcohol, she.
You know, now I have the federal contact.
That's a hard. So.
Organized in the county.
So, and.
We ended our son. And just to provide some.
Yeah. Right. Oh, that's.
So it's.
Oh. This is. Oh, yeah. Sorry. You can do that. You know what I. Really wants to get oh, good. Yeah.
We might. I think the one that's on the stand is the last one. We can always order more.
And
I'll take that one, because I wanted you to sign it for someone that I want to send it to.
this, I know this is it.
Vision clarity, really great.
Thank you.
It's good to hear that you find it to be a good function.
Yes.
I'll send you that.
Well, you could put me in.
Yeah.
But, yeah, no, I'd love to be on your, and, we'll be reaching out. Oh, I think they contact already been made. I'm also affiliated with the Jackson Montgomery.
Oh, great.
And, they will be bringing candidates together, and I think you should be in this.
Excellent. Okay.
So, I, you know, I need to pay.
Sounds fair.
Of course.
You know,
Okay.
but if it's not endorsed.
They not endorse.
Why did I ask? What, because I.
Yeah. And I know that we had a lot of people who work on it.
Yes.
My campaign manager, yes,
Yeah.
And you know, of course, we have lots of students also who work in the county, sure. But yeah, I was thinking that a couple of this, one, the person that they really everybody in the
Right.
she was, you know, working between the office of and all the campaign now going to Mondo.
Oh.
So,
Oh.
yeah. Yeah, but you know,
That would be at least a part of it.
yes.
But she did get more endorsements. Not a few of them, but.
But she, I mean, I heard the interviews that nobody today.
I know, I can imagine, because I heard her, I was actually in the interview with her. Then I saw them, I would say the teachers have done other things that surprised me too. But that was certainly one of the biggest.
Yeah, that was actually, that was. That was. And, you know, and then also because the Bob is, you know, that has the largest percentage of revenue.
Right.
And so there was sentiment which will.
Right, really promoting, yes.
Really, we didn't get that on the doors at all.
Yeah.
You know, people just wanted to get the stuff done.
Sure.
But within working progressive endorsing community, that was your.
Yeah, that was, yeah. Well, I'll just say, I thought you ran a wonderful campaign and obviously you succeeded, you know, and I look forward to your representation. I hope you can start to think about how to build coalitions amongst the new council.
Oh, we're already working.
I
Working a lot of angles.
work spectacular.
Yeah.
And help us with our executive as well.
Yes, that's what I asked.
Um,
On that as well.
I sometimes I just think he's like the Bert Lahr in that movie, The Wizard of Oz. He just needs a little more courage. But you guys can help give that to him.
I think that's right. The name was a council help. There's also some issues where we just don't quite see eye to eye, but I think once we get it, so that we want him to, I want him to want to work with us and to feel like kind of we're the powerhouse.
Right.
So be with us.
Right.
You know, and I think
Sorry, I'm not very much. Hello.
Oh, how much COVID do you have?
I hope we not.
This was fun, Alan. This was fun. Thanks a lot.
So I just got back from Maine where I was for a while, so now.
You just got back from me? How cool are you?
Oh, they're not. No COVID. I only saw one person basically. How are you? It's so good to see you. I wish that. Oh, I wish I could have. I wish I could come to the Saturday event and see Jeff as well, but I have some conflict. Now I don't remember what it was. But yeah. Okay. But if I'm not there, you have to. Send my love.
That was so cool, Kristin.
That was Thank you so much, Ellen.
Oh my God.
This was really fun. Great.
Great job.
We apologize for coming in.
Hey,
I actually worked at the National Labor Relations Board. And I really, and we were telling the youngster with us who had the
Hi.
camp.
for some other social outing, no.
I'm Eric's girlfriend, Kayla.
Hello.
And I work with John at the NLRB. So I brought my NLRB colleagues. Yeah.
Yeah, so I was totally eating it up there, yeah. Cool. And we were just on, like I said, we came at the collective, well, you're really young too.
I think we're probably about the same age. Yeah, I'm 32.
You and Sarah,
Yeah.
yeah. But we had to tell her about the vagina pie she was like, oh, she knew the song, but, you know, we're like, go, Mom. Yeah, so we apologize for missing the first part of your talk, but it was party for, I don't know what we call it.